All right, so here we are again, writing an essay about being an identical twin. So I spent at least an hour, um, and probably being a little older, I'm probably, and having written a lot of essays over the years, I'm probably a little bit more honed in terms of my speed of thought process. But um, I'll just share. So maybe I work a lot faster than you might, or my brain works faster, or maybe slower. Maybe maybe when you're younger, your brain is even faster because you're in the school mode. So maybe it took me 30, maybe it'll take you 5. But I think it's important to, now that we've decided on the topic and we've sort of brain dumped some interesting, obvious questions. We thought about, okay, some ways that I could structure the essay. We talked about maybe an opening, potential idea, and then decided on childhood, teen years. Then dumped out some interesting anecdotes. Now, the thought process is really going to go to sort of stripping it down to exactly what you want to write about. And I'll talk about tone first. So, a humble person can write an essay that's, maybe got a little bit of swagger or confidence, or, maybe a little bit of defiance, or even a little bit of haughtiness, and vice versa. You could have someone that's, really haughty. Maybe their personality is really haughty and sort of arrogant, and maybe they're at this specific essay might be humble. So you always want to think about how the reader's going to perceive you. And that's why being clear is important, and also planning a lot of this stuff out, because you sort of want to have that in the back of your mind as you're writing. You want to say, okay, am I going to be cheeky? Am I going to be funny? And you can obviously pivot, to use a business term. You can pivot along the way, but it's nice to sort of have a gauge. So with me, with this essay topic, the most important thing is I don't want to come off as like super arrogant, and I don't want my brother to look bad. It's like when you're writing an essay that's personal, you're making decisions, right? You're like, okay, well, am I going to stick to the truth? For example, if you're writing like an autobiography, or you're writing a biography, or you're writing a memoir, or whatever, and you just talk about, the unvarnished truth, which can make you look really, really bad as well, because you're going to share exactly how something went down. But when it comes to like an essay for a class, you know, um, you might elect to say, okay, I'm going to make sure, and these are all considerations that you've got to think about. Because they will affect your writing, and they can potentially affect your grade as well. But I think that it's more important, like, when you're writing an essay for, elementary, more likely middle school, um, and obviously high school, but this is more of a middle school type essay, or a little bit later elementary school, where you're writing personal essay, but you're trying to be, a little bit interesting, sort of have a little bit of sophistication, a little bit of nuance, etc. Um, this isn't like first grade. Now we're a little bit beyond. You should be a little bit beyond. So that's really where I'm thinking about. Um, so we want to think about that. We want to think about tone. So what I thought about. So tone's important. So just considerations that I'm going to think about. Not make bro look bad and me look good. That also just looks, and look me look good exclusively. It just looks like you're mean, and it doesn't look good from the reader's perspective. So you want to be aware of that. This is all just important. It's not necessarily the tone, but it's just sort of the voice, and then the choice of anecdote or dotes, and then also my perspective on it. If I don't want to use this as a forum to bash my brother, or to make myself look better. This is very important when you're writing a personal essay. You got to think about you know um, these considerations. So I also wanted to think about, uh, looking at these. I'm thinking about like our heads. Oddly enough, our heads. You know, um, and so heads would be like slamming heads, and then maybe, taking a test because you got to use your head. And we can think of a cute, cheeky way to connect this, to perform well, right? Um, it doesn't have to be obvious. It doesn't have to be obvious, like, oh, we have to go this route, we have to go that route. You're just thinking like, what through line, what thread can I use and make it work? And sometimes you might try something and it doesn't work. And then you have to back up and go do something else. But it's okay. It's part of the process. I think the most important thing also is just patience with the process and just sort of enjoying, like, swimming in these learning environments. Whether it's physics or math or or English, like, or writing. I think that. But yeah, this is so. Yeah, so let's brainstorm on it. We might change our mind, but let's just brainstorm on it. So slamming heads, then taking your test, that's, heads, and then also, um, the director of the plays, used his head, um, and we used our, like, I guess, performative heads, like acting, um, um, in plays, and then also lip syncs, etc. Like school lip syncs and all that stuff. And there's a little bit more we could talk about, but I think this is fine. Just the broad overview of what we might talk about. So, and then you're thinking, well, you know what? Slamming heads is kind of long, long descriptive. It's like, okay, I'm going to delete that. Um, and then taking the test, like, that's pretty interesting. Did you ever take your test for somebody? Did you ever date somebody? I decided to omit dating and stuff. That's sort of its own entity. We could probably write a whole essay on that, like, 'cause it's interesting, and it's like a loaded discussion when you're talking about, you know, sexuality, or relationships and all that stuff. Plus, you're writing it for a teacher, or you're writing, potentially writing it for a class, or it just all depends on the audience, right? If you're writing it for an article, if you're writing it for an online news magazine, you want to think, okay, what section would they have it in, and would this fit in that section based on all the other essays that have been written before it? So it all has to do with what you decide to write. An article for Yahoo Shine might be different than an article for Hello Giggles, for example, which might be different than an article for Huffington Post, etc. So just you always want to remember who's your audience. But in terms of sort of a formal writing essay, I think that it's important to just to give concessions, and to you know you want to do well as far as the grade, and you don't want to go down a rabbit hole, and that could be a rabbit hole. So it's easier to just say, let's talk about something else. Um so I think that ultimately my conclusion ended up being, you got to live a little. So I don't want to make my brother look bad, and me look good exclusively. So I've gotta make sure that my stories are not just me looking good. Well, taking the test, I took the test for him, so that would make me look good, right? Being, oh well, he's the he is totally the nerd, or the one that took the test for his brother, and da da da. So I'm like, okay, that's gonna make me look good, and then you know, so I'm like, okay, well, how would I want how would I want to make sure he looks good? Well, in the plays, he always got the biggest role. It was like, okay, let me include that to have some balance. And you want to give yourself so much meat where there's a lot of room when you rewrite, and you want to keep these considerations in mind. So you're like, okay, well, our heads, taking the test, director of plays. Um, so maybe slamming heads is a good opening story. You know, and maybe our first quote will be, this story has to do with our heads, or something like that. Um, so this could definitely be a 3 or 4 page essay. Now you've got the slamming heads and the condo, and then we jump into taking a test. Speaking of heads, speaking of our brains, our craniums, and then and that's a good way to think about uh, something that connects these anecdotes or stories, because it's going to make it easy for when you have transition sentences between paragraphs, right? And even if you're sort of stretching, that's part of your sort of creative license. You're writing an essay, you're trying to be creative, you're trying to make connections. So you want to keep this in mind. So like, okay, so director of the plays uses head. I guess our heads, are performative heads in terms of acting, and we're using our creative heads in terms of lip syncs. Um, and I could omit this, but then that would only make me look good. It would actually remove this, would make my bro kind of look bad because he's having me take his tests. But it's still funny. It's still a great story, and it's I still think it's pretty interesting. And I think it brings people into that sort of world of being an identical twin. And then I could, be positive about Chris and make sure that I'm balanced and I'm not just using this as a forum to bash him or to make myself look good, etc. So in terms of picking my anecdotes, that I want to keep that in mind. So he always got the bigger role, and so we could talk about that. And yeah, that's definitely 3 or 4 pages, not a problem. And then my conclusion. So even though I'm pretty humble about a lot of stuff, I still like my thesis. I think is ultimately going to be if you're a twin, if you're an identical twin, you got to live a little. You have to, um, which might not be my tone, which might not be my day to day tone in terms of how I normally behave or how I normally act or communicate. But it's just for this essay, with all of these ideas and just thinking about how to put them into an essay and how to make choices, right? I'll make the decision like, okay, I'm going to make the decision that this is going to be about our heads, slamming heads, taking a test for my brother, and then we also used our heads in a positive way, um, by acting in plays and studying our lines, and and doing lip syncs and stuff. And then I can jump into the conclusion. It's basically saying, you got to use your head, um, and you got to live a little. So that's sort of the overall um, sort of the overall structure of how I think we can write this essay. Again, I'm not saying this is going to be the greatest essay that has ever been written, but this is sort of how you distill down the essence of where you're headed. No pun intended. Where you're going, in terms of how you're going to structure it. So this is a really important, I think, um, video, because this is sort of the big leap, brainstorming and picking a topic and then writing anecdotes and deciding how you're going to structure it. Like that's all important. But I think this is sort of the big leap. It's like, okay, how does your brain think about what connections I can make? And the best connection I could think of in terms of something that's not a 30-page essay, but more like a 4 to 5 page essay, three to 4 to 5 page essay, is using our heads. And that's going to help us structurally, in terms of these transition sentences between paragraphs. Um, and then, but it's also sort of a similar theme, and then it connects to the conclusion. My friend, identical twin, you got to use your head, and you also got to live a little. So I'm sort of giving myself license to say, okay, yeah, well, we did kind of cheat, but he, as we'll find out, we did get punished for it, um, and or he got punished for it, but I still, and then I also still want to remember to not use this as a forum to make myself look good and make him look bad. So these are all considerations you have to make when you're choosing what to write about and this next step. So until the next video, hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, obviously ask. I'm gonna do a bunch of these videos with a bunch of different essays, and this is a really key section. And I think it's something that you guys might want to focus on a lot when you're writing essays, because this, I think, really helps make the leap to being able to write a decently structured essay to actually writing a quality essay, that a reader can follow, and you won't have as hard of a time making connections between paragraphs and making these leaps. You want to do it now. The best time to do it is now, in terms of deciding that it's going to be about our heads, quote unquote, and deciding that the conclusion is going to connect to using your head. Use your head if you have a twin, and then you have to live a little, because then I'm going to weave all that in to the body of the essay and sort of the tone of the essay. Thank you very much.